Good morning, everyone. Amidst all the conversations that we're having, today is perhaps the most important one. My name is Rishika Bhatia, and as SME 10X, it's our pleasure to be joining hands with a partner that has been committed to the cause of providing value to their community, particularly in times of crisis, Cigna. At Cigna, mental health, productivity, wellness have always been critical pillars of the business. And as we go through this time of uncertainty, many of us are feeling a wide range of emotions. Mindfulness during this time is essential for the health and well-being of our communities. Doing things that we find enjoyable or calming us down can help us get through these difficult times. And this could mean meditating, deep breathing, stretching, or even sometimes just sitting quietly and mindfully. So today's session is dedicated to doing all of those things. And what's even better is we have an expert with us today to guide you through the process. So please welcome Dominic Watts.
Thanks, Rishika, for that introduction. I really appreciate that. I'm very, very pleased to be here. I've been looking forward to this for a while. My colleague and I have been doing many of these webinars during this time. As everybody knows, it's an unbelievably uncertain time we're living through, and nobody was prepared for this really, and we're just trying to cope with it as best we can. And there's a lot of lessons that we're all trying to learn during this time. And it's brought many, many people to mindfulness. Within our company, we've seen quite a surge in interest in mindfulness, meditation practices. And I think one of the reasons for this is that as human beings, it's difficult for us to make a big decision to change anything about our lives unless there's a crisis. Sadly, I'm sure many of you listening will acknowledge that this is true. When something seems to be seriously out of whack, then we will try to address it. And so perhaps that's why we've seen this surge. What I want to do today is to show you exactly what mindfulness is, what it really means, which means I want to give you a taste of a short meditation also. And the main focus for today's discussion is how does mindfulness relate to our working relationships and the world of business? Because it's a really interesting question. We do a lot of work with corporate teams, and mindfulness is really, really picking up all over the world in various industries. And it can also be done wrong, I have to say. That's something that we come across a lot, is there's so many misconceptions about what mindfulness is that it's very easy actually for it to be misunderstood. Let me give you one brief example of that. Within schools, which is a lot of the work I do is within schools, many people see mindfulness as a way to calm the children down. And so you might go into a school and you might see that children are being very noisy and raucous, and the teacher does a little bit of mindfulness to make them be quiet. Now, even though that might work, it's still sending almost slightly the wrong message. We're telling children that being energetic and having a good time is a bad thing and they need to relax. So that just shows you one tiny little misconception, which can actually gives children really the wrong message. And you see a lot of this going on in the business world as well with mindfulness, that mindfulness is unfortunately being used by many companies just as a way to increase productivity. And really that kind of goes against the spirit of the whole thing. So there's lots of misconceptions like this that I want to uncover during this talk. And I'm hoping that after my 15-minute intro to mindfulness, where I get rid of some of these misconceptions and we have a taste of meditation, I'm really looking forward today to fielding lots of questions from you, because ordinarily when I do webinars, I do a 45-minute to 50-minute talk, and then I've been not receiving that many questions afterwards. And I'm really looking forward to having some questions from all of you. We've already received a couple of really interesting ones before this talk that I'm looking forward to addressing. So what exactly is mindfulness and what does it mean? Well, let me just say from my personal perspective, mindfulness is an absolute game changer. I really honestly believe this. And I think this is why everybody's coming to this at this stage of the modern world. We're seeing that there's so many things about our old way of living, which everybody seems to have called normal, which are really shouldn't be normal. For example, greed shouldn't necessarily be normal. Running around trying to constantly buy things to fill up a void that we feel within us shouldn't be normal. And so there's lots of things, you've probably seen various videos going around WhatsApp and Instagram with lots of people saying a similar thing. We shouldn't just be trying to desperately go back to how things were before, because there was a lot wrong with what was going on before. And the business world is certainly no exception to that. The first question I have then for everybody watching is, what is your most precious resource as a human being? If you had to try to say, what is your most precious resource? You don't need to post this as a comment, but just think, what's most precious to you in terms of something that you have? Perhaps you might think of your kids, your family, your friends, and I totally get that. What I'm trying to suggest today is that attention is our most valuable resource, and it's our most important resource that we have access to. And to understand mindfulness, really, we're trying to understand what attention is and what we're doing with our attention on a moment-to-moment basis. You saw the lovely little animation at the beginning of this showing a list of all sorts of positive things which are associated with mindfulness practice. So focusing on one task at a time, for example, making friends with stress. Now, none of these benefits can come without the use of our attention, without us directing our attention in a particular way. And that's actually what mindfulness is all about. I'm going to give you a quote now, if I can remember it perfectly, from Sean Parker, who's the co-creator of Facebook. And he said that the intention of Facebook when it was started was to take as much of our conscious time and attention as possible. So it wasn't to make money. Obviously, that's why they wanted to do that, but it wasn't to give people a great experience as a primary thing. The primary drive was to take as much of our time and conscious attention as possible. I think you'll all agree they've been incredibly successful. Instagram, Twitter, WhatsApp even are all using the same algorithms that Facebook developed in order to encourage people to use them as much as possible. And this is a big issue in society. Lots of people are discussing, and it's got an interesting relationship to mindfulness. So the important thing to take from that quotation and that example is that attention is paramount. It's incredibly important in our lives, and it's incredibly undervalued also. We're not really aware of what we're doing with our attention. And as a result, we get caught up in all sorts of things that we don't necessarily want to be caught up in. Okay? So the second thing, as an introduction of why mindfulness is so important, is to see that we don't use our attention properly. So to exemplify this, I'm going to speak about an experiment that was done many years ago on the Washington, D.C. metro station. It's absolutely fascinating experiment. And in many ways, the results are not surprising, and I'm sure you won't be surprised by them either. There was a violinist playing at the metro station, and you can see this video on YouTube. Ordinarily, I have a PowerPoint, I show the video, and you can just see people in the station are just all going by really, really fast. Everybody's going about their business incredibly quickly. 1,300 people went through the station, and only 13 stopped in an hour. So 0.1% stopped. It's a tiny, tiny percentage. Maybe that is what we expected. Out of the 13 who stopped, half of them were kids, and they were dragged away by their parents quite quickly, because obviously the parents are in a hurry and it's not important. We're not focusing on that is not important. However, maybe that situation changes when you realize that the violinist was one of the greatest violinists on earth, Joshua Bell, and he was playing the world's most expensive violin, and he was playing the four most difficult pieces of music ever written for violin, arguably. So this truly was an extraordinary event, an incredible event that had been planned on purpose as a sociological experiment to see how many people will stop when there truly is something amazing happening there. It was something fantastic. Even if you don't like classical music, you don't really like violin, there is no denying what that man was doing was incredible. It's taken him his entire life, and he's the best in the world pretty much at doing this. But none of them noticed, except for a tiny, tiny percentage. And the reasons for that are very clear. Normally if I'm live with people, I ask and get some feedback from the audience, but it's always the same answers. Everybody's focused on their own lives. That's why they didn't see him. They're focused on their own worries, their own concerns. They're thinking about what they're going to have for dinner. They're thinking about what their friend said to them in the morning on their WhatsApp, whatever, something like that. The point is that they're consumed. Their attention is consumed in the world of their imagination. And so it's an improper and inappropriate use of attention for that moment, because in that moment, something truly amazing was going on and they missed it. So the question we ask in mindfulness is, what else are we missing? I wonder how much attention everybody that's listening to this now is paying right now to me. Ask yourself. That's the kind of question we ask all the time in mindfulness. Look at yourself right now, your own state of mind. Are you distracted by anything right now? Are there any other concerns you have on your mind right at this moment, or even 5 minutes ago when this began? Were there any concerns playing on your mind? It's really interesting to consider that. And if you start to ask yourself that more and more and more, what happens is you come into the present more and more frequently, and you start to be able to direct your attention more consciously to the task which is at hand, which right now is, for better or for worse, listening to me, right? And so straight away, maybe you can see one of the implications for working. If you can practice mindfulness, you practice meditation regularly, you're grounded in the present moment far more than you ordinarily would be. And this allows you to focus on the task at hand. If you have a very long to-do list, what's the point of focusing on all of the ones which are after the number one on the list? It's total waste of your time. You can't do 10 of them at once. Just do the first one as effectively as possible. But what's preventing us from doing that ordinarily is distraction. And distraction is a key failure of attention, okay? So if you practice a mindfulness course or you start to learn to meditate, these are the kind of themes that are discussed. And what happens is, as you spend time really honestly looking at yourself and your own way of living, all sorts of transformations occur in such a short space of time. It's really amazing. After the 8-week course that we provide, which is the same as other courses you can get in other countries, people always say the same thing. Number one is they say, my relationships are completely different now. I've realized that I was not paying attention to this person properly. I wasn't totally present with my kids. And so now I'm paying more attention to them. And we also hear that almost invariably we hear after the course that people feel they can manage their emotions better because they're simply noticing what their thoughts are doing, and they're just kind of putting a stop to that a little bit earlier and not expressing every negative thought that comes into their mind. You know, you might have an argument at work. This happens all the time, little bits of conflict, and it buzzes away in your mind, and perhaps you want to say something negative to that person who upset you, and really deep down you know that it's not actually going to help the situation, but sometimes we really can't help it. And I'm not saying that if you practice mindfulness, that will never, ever happen. But it's certainly, from my point of view, and all the studies that have been done, it really seems like that sort of thing reduces dramatically when people practice mindfulness. And the impact of an entire team practicing mindfulness is absolutely phenomenal. So what I want to do now, we're going to have quite a long Q&A session after this. But first of all, I want us to do a meditation. It'll be a 5-minute meditation because mindfulness is all about doing it. It is useful to talk about it and to think about it so that you can understand the principles and understand the theory behind it. And hopefully I've done a little bit of that for you there, showing why attention is really important and how it can get caught up and cause us issues. But really, practicing mindfulness is about exactly that, practicing it, doing it. So I want to show you now with this meditation what it feels like, or what it is like to live in a different mode. So what we're going to be doing is coming to our senses. I'm sure you've all heard this phrase before. We use it when we want to tell somebody to snap back to reality. That's another thing that we say, back to reality. Well, where were they before? If they weren't in reality, where were they before? That's what we're saying, is they were in their own fantasy world, their own little world, in the imagination, immersed in their own drama. So we want to snap back to reality by coming into the world of the senses. And that's how simple mindfulness really is. It is the most simple thing in the world. It could not be simpler. It's just learning to spend some time in the world of the senses, and that wakes you up to the present moment around you. And I'm convinced that if they did the Washington, D.C. metro experiment again, I'm absolutely convinced that if they had an entire station full of people who had just done a long meditation and mindfulness practice, I think the percentage of people who listened to the violinist would have been far, far higher than it was in the real experiment. So, enough talk. Let's have a go at this. So just make yourself comfy. Just not too comfy. I have to always say that because sometimes people do fall asleep during meditations, which is fine really, but not necessarily the idea. So make yourself quite comfy and see if you can have a relatively straight back. You know, you don't want to be stiff and uncomfortable, but we're trying to sit with a sense of being fully awake and fully alert, because that sends the signals to our system, our brain, that we're not going to sleep right now. This is about actually paying attention to something, paying attention in a different way. So just close your eyes for me when you're ready, please. And as soon as this sound disappears, just want you to focus on your breathing. So allowing your attention to come fully into the body now, to the center of the chest, as you focus on what it really feels like to breathe. And I really mean that. See how much you can notice about how it feels to breathe. Right now in this moment, what is breathing? We're not concerned with any breath that has come before or any breath that will come after this one breath. Following the journey of the air coming into the nostrils, down the throat and into the chest. I wonder what you can all notice about what happens to the chest as we breathe in. What does the expansion of the chest really feel like? Can we be curious about that? And as we breathe out, can we get a sense of the body relaxing? Is the body relaxing as we breathe out? Is tension being released from our muscles as we breathe out? Now I want to invite you to shift your attention to a different part of the body now. So we're going to go all the way down to the soles of our feet. As we sit here, wherever we are, I want to invite you to strongly bring that attention to the soles of the feet and to simply notice. What do they feel like? What can you sense? Continue to pay attention. And as anything else comes into your world to take your attention, maybe a thought, a daydream, a memory, that's okay. It doesn't mean that you've failed. This is what the mind does. The mind is always throwing up new thoughts, new concerns. And if that happens as you focus on your feet, I'd like you to just notice it and bring yourself back to the soles of the feet and where they make contact with the floor. I wonder if it's possible for us all to find the point where the soles of the feet connect with the floor beneath us. Can we feel how strong the floor is beneath our feet? Just allowing yourself to continue to give attention to that area of the body, despite whatever else happens. It doesn't matter if it's difficult. It doesn't matter if there's daydreams coming and going. What matters is that we return there to the world of the senses, snapping into this reality that's all around us all the time. And when you can't hear this sound anymore, just opening your eyes gently, coming back to the room. As you open your eyes, just notice how you're feeling. Have a look around the room that you're in. See what you notice as you look around. Just looking at the objects around you with fresh eyes. It's one of the big things that we're practicing in mindfulness, is looking with fresh eyes. Okay, thank you for joining me for that meditation. Now, that was that was such a short amount of time that we just spent practicing that. And I wonder if you can see what might be gained from practicing that regularly, because really that's what I'm inviting and encouraging you to do, is to make mindfulness a part of your life. And the benefits are so numerous that it's impossible to go through them all, to be totally honest. But what I'd like to do now is I'm going to finish my talk here and we're going to start a Q&A. So thank you so much for joining again. Thanks for listening to what I've said. I hope that it was interesting and it made sense. And I'm really looking forward to taking all of your questions. Okay.
Thanks, Dominic. That was really good. I'm feeling zenned out, and I'm sure everyone that's watching is as well. So I know you talked a lot about, mindfulness in general and how it can, impact our daily lives. But I just wanted to take a second to hone in on mindfulness and the role it can play while we're working remotely, right? Because a lot of us are working from home at the moment. So from the perspective of someone that's managing a team, how would you say mindfulness is a great tool to manage conflict remotely within teams or while working from home?
Thanks for that. That's a really great question. It's so important. It might be the number one concern for people who are trying to bring mindfulness into their working environment, because there's, as human beings, even when we're not working remotely, when we're working in the ordinary environment, quote unquote ordinary environment, back in the office, small conflicts happen so frequently, and larger conflicts sadly happen frequently as well. And being able to manage them is such an enormous part of keeping team spirit and maintaining, levels of happiness and satisfaction at work. And so how does mindfulness relate to that? Well, mindfulness can really transform our relationships, and this is how. Just imagine somebody that has absolutely no awareness whatsoever of their own emotional world. So every time they get angry, they simply act on whatever the anger is telling them to do and pushing them to do. Every time they're sad, they just let it completely dominate their day. Imagine a really small child, for example. Actually, small children can snap out of these emotional states quite quickly, but you can also see that kids can allow a negative event to really, really almost poison their entire day. I used to be a teacher for many, many years, and I could see that if a kid falls over, they hold on to that little cut like it's the most important thing in the world, and their entire day, or even longer than a day, revolves around that sometimes. Now, just imagine having that little control over your emotional world, and then contrast that with somebody who's really understands the way that their emotions link to one another, the way that their emotions link to their thoughts, and the way that their thoughts link to their actions. And just consider how much of a difference that would make in the way that you deal with other people. I know that personally, since I've been practicing mindfulness since I was literally 15 years old, so almost all of my life that I can remember, I've been practicing this sort of thing. And it's so difficult to overestimate how much of an impact it makes on your relationships, because when you understand yourself and when you can see the way that your thoughts are leading into your actions, the way that your thoughts are pushing you to behave in a certain way, you start to understand other people vastly better also. So it makes us far more empathetic. So if a member of your team is going through something really difficult, which they all are right now, including the managers, then mindfulness can allow us to access at the perspective of the other person, by allowing us to really come to terms with our own. And so another example of that is, how do we deal with really difficult emotions? One of the most significant parts of practicing mindfulness is learning how to relate to your own emotions in a much more healthy and intelligent way. And that may sound a little bit strange or vague, so I'll try and expand on that a little bit. I wonder what people do when they experience fear. Fear is a very, very powerful emotion that people are encountering a lot these days. And I wonder what people think that they do when they experience fear. Well, what we see when we do a mindfulness course is that our natural responses to emotions such as fear are totally ingrained within us, and they're beyond our control. So when we experience fear, let's say you're afraid of flying. I have a good friend who's very afraid of flying. And I said, okay, what do you do when the fear comes? And she gave various examples. She tries to distract herself. She tries to do this. And she realized, when through questioning, that she's trying to escape from the fear or squash the fear. This is what naturally we all do subconsciously. We can't help it. And when you practice mindfulness and meditation, you start to see these reactions from an observer's perspective. And it allows you to then take a more intelligent response instead. So you'll learn to feel your own fear and allow it to be there and accept that it's okay. And it brings you into a much nicer relationship with your negative emotions. And what that then allows you to do is to bring the same dynamic in your conversations with your employees who are going through difficult times. So it will allow you to say things like, right, I understand where you're coming from, and actually be sincere. You will actually understand where they're coming from, rather than just saying it because it's a nice thing to say, you know. I hope that that's answered your question a little bit. I'm more than happy to take further questions along that theme.
Yeah, so actually staying in, continuing the discussion on working from home, I have a couple of questions coming in. So John asks us through our website, while we're working at home, home is usually a place that you come back to from work, and it's kind of, your place to rest. So how do you kind of maintain your productivity levels while staying at home and not get distracted?
Yeah, that's a really good one. It's a very tough one as well. I think that normally when we go out of the house to work, there's so many things about that process that allow us to switch modes psychologically. So even putting on your clothes, lots of people, when you're working from home, you don't even need to wear any sort of smart clothes. And even that convinces your subconscious that you're just at home. So even just wearing those clothes, those relaxing clothes, it might make you feel more relaxed. And maybe that might be a good thing. I'm not saying not to wear comfortable, relaxed clothes, but just trying to highlight the fact that all of the little things which we normally do get us into work mode. We get in the car, we have our routine, we get there, we see everybody, we have a little chat, and then we go to our desk. All of those things put us in work mode. So how do we create that when we're at home? Well, there's a number of things we can do. And the most powerful thing, quite predictably, from your point of view probably, is that people like myself who are mindfulness trainers, and anybody that we've trained, practice meditation in the morning, because what it does is that it, as I said during the meditation and before, it brings you into the moment, and it allows you to focus on the next task with the optimum level of attention that you want to give to that next task, right? And so it's one of the big things that we're trying to do in mindfulness, is just shift our focus from this whole story of the day, the story of your week. Just think about how frequently we're immersed in the story of the week. Oh God, it's only Tuesday, I'm so tired, or whatever. My wife's a teacher, so teachers are always working out where they are within the term in order to work out how they can motivate themselves. All of that from a mindfulness perspective is just a total waste of energy from our point of view. All you need to do is be present now and focus on this task. And if you can train yourself to do that, you give yourself the maximum possible energy to actually achieve what you need to achieve with that task there and then. And again, as I was saying before about getting to know yourself, your thoughts and emotions, as you practice meditation, you'll see perhaps maybe a negative mindset about work. You might see a thinking trap. That's what we call them in mindfulness. There's all sorts of thinking traps that come up. You might see your thoughts literally say, oh, I don't have the energy to work today, for example. And normally that thought would just happen, and you would just act as if the thought were true, right? Because there's no gap between our thoughts and our actions. We just act whatever the thought says, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And so as you practice mindfulness, you might end up seeing that in your meditation, and waking up and realizing, actually, I don't need to believe that. I don't need to believe what the thought is telling me. I bet I can actually muster up the energy to work as normal. And suddenly, state of mind shifts, your attitude shifts, your focus shifts, and your brain feels, oh, right, I need more energy. And then energy can come seemingly out of nowhere just because we shift our focus. So actually, a lot of the lack of energy people are experiencing, I would say, is because of little thinking traps we're falling into every day. Like, oh, it's so hard, for example. Oh, it's so hard working from home. Loads of people are saying that. And maybe that's true. But thinking that it's really hard, what is that doing? How is that contributing to this process? Is that fueling the fire? That's the kind of question we would ask in mindfulness. And I think undoubtedly it is. Negative mindset is fueling the fire and sapping our energy. So it's all about learning how to bring yourself into a mindset which is going to help you to respond as well as possible to that moment that you're actually in. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. So, Dom, how would you suggest HR leaders and HR members develop that mindset within their workforce, especially now since we're seeing a lot of them transition into the workplace, or they will be transitioning back into the workplace?
Yeah, good question. There's many ways that you can incorporate this. I would say the most important thing for a manager or a leader within a company, the most important thing by miles, is for them to try to understand this themselves. Because when the leader of a team understands this, it affects everybody. It's got to be a top-down process from our point of view. When I would do my work in schools, everyone's really excited for me to start teaching the kids meditation, and then they're a bit let down and surprised when I say, no, we're teaching the adults, not the kids, because we start with the teachers, and then the teachers help to change the way that they operate with the kids, and it just filters through to the kids. And ultimately, we do train the children in mindfulness anyway. But I would say the same thing applies when we go into corporate teams. We really want management to understand this and to practice this themselves, and then they change the way they relate to their workforce. This is not to say, I'm not saying that you should not encourage your workforce to learn mindfulness. Absolutely, you should. It's a great thing to do for everybody. But the number one thing is for people to understand it themselves. It's very easy to think that you understand this and to not actually practice it. It's something you see a lot in this area. It's almost like a mindfulness hypocrisy. So people are talking about it all the time, but acting in the complete opposite way. And you really don't want that from, I've seen it done in almost a false way in companies before, where it's kind of being pushed onto people when the person that's doing the pushing doesn't really get it. So I hope that makes sense and doesn't seem too negative. I really want to highlight the importance of the people at the top doing that. Now, you can take courses, so you can have companies such as ourselves who come in. Well, obviously now we're not coming in, we're doing it remotely, but doing a mindfulness course, a weekly course over time, which includes meditation, so that people can understand this stuff. And you can have your whole team doing that so that everybody's on board together. Or you can simply have meetings where this is brought up for discussion. But I would really encourage having someone who's an expert to have some part in the process, because if it's just something that the manager has heard about and they think is a good idea, it may not be quite as hard hitting when it comes across to the workforce. They may not necessarily buy into it as much as if it's somebody who's been doing it for many years, who's talking about the benefits of it.
Yeah, I think that made sense, Dom. So I'm seeing a lot of questions coming in. Sanjeev on our website asks us, how do you sustain mindfulness? Which I think is a fantastic question.
Yeah, that really is a fantastic question. And for me as well, like I said, I've been doing this for 15 years, and it's a question for myself as well every day. It's a question for my colleagues who are also training people in mindfulness, and every mindfulness trainer around the world. There's a great story actually when mindfulness was first brought into the medical industry. And Mark Williams, who's now an amazing proponent of mindfulness, he started the Oxford University Centre of Mindfulness. It's amazing that exists, by the way. Oxford University have an entire centre for mindfulness. And he was first introduced to this mindfulness course. And this really speaks to what I said a minute ago. And John Kabat-Zinn, who designed the course, initially he said, right, so we've got to do these 40-minute meditations. And Mark Williams said, well, no, it's fine. I kind of get it. I understand it. I don't really need to do the 40-minute meditation. He said, no, you do. You do need to do it, because this has to be done. And so for someone like myself that's been practicing every day for years, I still need to make sure I practice it every day. And the most effective way is to just have meditation in your routine. Our company truly believe that in the future, and maybe not the distant future either, meditation is going to be seen like brushing your teeth. It's simply it's like having a shower for your mental world. It really, really feels like that. When you get into the habit of doing it, people really start to miss their meditations. They start to have it as a safe and beautiful space within their lives where they can just let the mind simmer down and settle. How often do we do that? We use the mind like imagine buying a new car that you really care about, which is really powerful, and just driving it all the time, every second of every day, never filling it up with petrol, never checking the oil, never doing anything. It's going to break down. It's going to be destroyed by the end of it. And I really do think that lots of the problems that we see in society, so many of the mental health issues are to do with overuse of the mental faculties. And it's an argument is being made that the degradation of the neurological system as people get older can partly be attributed to this, that we're wearing it out. We don't know how to switch gears. Meditation is switching gears. And it doesn't have to be for half an hour in the morning, which is how I do it, although I think that is a very good idea for people to do. You can do mindfulness activities throughout the day. And I think for people starting out, it's really important. So let me give you an example. So look, I've got a cup of coffee here, decaf, because I can't handle it otherwise. Look, it's got a little monkey on it. When we drink a cup of coffee, do we actually notice what we're doing? Or is it totally subconscious and automatic? We call it autopilot. How many cups of coffee or tea has everybody in this webinar right now drank and only tasted the first sip and ignored all the rest of it? Right? It's because the mind hijacks our attention straight away, and ultimately this is all happening subconsciously. Now, how simple is it to just, every time you go for your coffee break, you totally focus on the world of the senses, because you understand the principle I've told you, that that's all you need to do, focus on the senses. So when you're pouring the water, even, you pay attention to your hand, how it feels. You really taste every single sip of the coffee. Now, this isn't because you really want to experience every bit of the coffee. Maybe you do, and that's fair enough. That's not necessarily why we're doing it. We're grounding ourselves in this reality, because this reality deserves our attention. The coffee deserves our attention. We should be there. And our habit is to come out of the world of the senses all the time and go off into our own little world. That's our habit. And so what we really want to do is to retrain the brain, and this is what mindfulness does, retrain the brain to be in this moment as often as possible. So one final thing to say on this, which might be the most helpful thing I can say, relates to my teaching career. What I used to do every time I had a lesson, and I'm sure there's loads of parents joining us, you can think about this with regards to your kids and e-learning. Every time I started a lesson, we did a meditation for at least 2 minutes, every single lesson of every single day. And I used to end the lessons with meditation as often as I could remember also. And my God, it has a huge impact. It really has a huge impact. And this is sustaining mindfulness. You're regularly bringing yourself back into the moment. I'm sure everybody's heard of Tiger Woods, the golfer. I've done a lot of work in sport in my career as well. I worked with a tennis player trying to teach him mindfulness. Tiger Woods, arguably the best golfer of all time, he's doing breathing exercises throughout his round of golf. He's going around, always remaining with his breath to keep him in the present, because he doesn't want to go off thinking about the drama of what might happen in the next shot or what happened in the shot before. So he's regularly connecting to the breath. Similarly, Novak Djokovic in tennis, these are incredibly high pressure environments, like it is at work at times. And these guys are making sure that they are in touch with the present moment. And that's all that needs to be done. But the difficulty is doing it regularly. It's very easy to think about it, but it's difficult to do it because it goes against all the momentum that we've been conditioned with since we were however young, very, very young.
No, that's great. That was very comprehensive, Dom. I hope that answered the question. Dom, earlier on in the discussion, we were talking about how there's a lot of conversation happening right now, especially, with news, and there are a lot of webinars happening as well. How does one kind of cut out all the noise and, almost make time for themselves? And I also have a question along the same lines, where we have Virendra, who asks, why is it sometimes that we can't control our thoughts? And how do we kind of get around that?
Yeah, those are two really good ones again. These are really good questions. So the first one was about the news and managing our time appropriately so that we're making time for ourselves. It's very easy to be constantly checking the news in this time. You know, most people, especially at the start of this pandemic, were relentlessly checking the numbers, right? Every day, checking the numbers, checking the numbers. It becomes so addictive. And all the technology has done us no favors in terms of mindfulness, none at all. It's encouraging us to be faster and faster and faster. And I would just say that all the things I've described already, that's the great thing about mindfulness, is there's nothing complicated about it. It's so simple. It just needs to be done. And as soon as you do it, as soon as you do meditation and you start to practice mindfulness throughout the day, you become aware of yourself more frequently. And it's quite simply, that stops you in many instances from doing things which are a waste of energy. You know, it just allows you to become aware. Oh, hold on. Why am I doing that? You know, most people, believe it or not, go through their entire lives. Many people go through their entire lives without ever really questioning themselves and the way that they're doing things. Yet all the time they're wasting their energy. You know, so I believe that we're really seeing a transition to a new way of being a human, where people are far more effective in the way that they live, because they're just understanding what they want to do with their time by observing themselves. So when you practice meditation, you practice mindfulness, you just wake up more frequently. It doesn't mean that your life is perfect from then. It doesn't mean you never waste your time. It doesn't mean you never look at your phone when actually it's not helping you. Of course you do. You still will do those things, but I really think you'll do it far less. And it's just bringing that general awareness to your life. And the second question, if I remember rightly, is a really, really important one about controlling thoughts. And this is a enormously significant theme within mindfulness. It comes up all the time, and normally this is what we cover in our very first session when we do a group, is what can we actually control? So I think there's a real illusion here. Many people believe that they can control their thoughts. And I think it's incredibly important for us to ask ourselves, can you really? When we did the body scan, we did a 5-minute body scan earlier in this talk, and I invited everyone to focus on the sensations in their feet. Thoughts probably arose in the minds of almost everybody. Now, were we controlling that? Did we choose for that to happen? No. If you really look at it, we are not choosing. The mind naturally creates thoughts and offers us thoughts. And it's trying to solve problems for us. It's trying to keep us safe. It's trying to keep us secure. And it's trying to keep us, well, it's not, I don't think the mind is trying to keep us busy, but it's used as a problem-solving machine. So the mind is always throwing up things for us to solve, even when there's nothing to solve. So when I'm asking you just to focus on your feet, I remember I did this with my dad recently, and he just thought the entire time about his legs. He was remembering what happened with his legs 5 minutes ago. He was remembering all his exercises he did with his legs. He didn't spend any time actually focusing on the senses, because thought comes and infects the process. And I really, really doubt that that is within his control. So the one thing that we can say in the mindfulness course that we can control, perhaps, because we go through all the examples and show that we can't control what happens to us in the outside world. We can't control other people's actions. We can't control the weather or what we're going to feel like on a certain day. Sometimes you wake up and you feel rubbish and you don't even know why. You know, you're not controlling that either. So we can't necessarily control our emotions. And as I've just described, you don't necessarily control your thoughts either. So the realm of what's actually within our control is really not as broad as we think it is. And really, it just comes down to, where do we place our attention? When you start practicing mindfulness, you see that you can start to control your responses to a certain extent. Viktor Frankl wrote a fantastic book called Man's Search for Meaning. And it's all about how we can find meaning in the most incredibly dire circumstances. It's an amazing book, very well known. I'd recommend it to anybody listening. He says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. There lies all your freedom and all your power. So between what happens to us in the outside world and the response we give, there is a space. Normally, we don't make use of that space. We don't even know it's there, because we get the thought and then straight away we act. And there's no control of that process. And what we're doing with mindfulness, we're slowing every aspect of the process down, creating this space, and then we can see all of the factors. We can see the thoughts, and we can use those thoughts as a perspective, and we can choose how to act, right? And that's the ultimate process of mindfulness, is creating that space and expanding it to give ourselves maximum freedom. Because if mindfulness is about one thing, it's about freedom.
Brilliant. So, Dom, we have a couple of people that are requesting to get in touch with you after the session. So, to everyone, I'd just like to add that, of course, you can get in touch with Dom. We will be sharing his details to everyone that tuned in. We will also have this session across social media. So, if you'd like to go back and watch it on demand, please do so. Before we kind of wrap up, Dom, a couple of questions, and I want to make sure that we address everything that's coming in. I have a question from Meeta who asks, what role can HR play in fostering mindfulness in the workplace? I think we answered this question. I have another question coming in from John. As a manager of teams, how can I instill the culture of mindfulness within my team organically? Again, I think we kind of answered this question, Dom. Would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think I'm really pleased that you added the word organically there, because that is how it needs to be done, as I said before. I think there needs to be real interest. There needs to be real passion from somebody within the team, preferably somebody near the top, who genuinely sees that this is needed and genuinely understands for themselves why this is needed. It's not an add-on. It's not a tool to help us earn more money. It's not like that. It shouldn't be like that. It should be seen as a different way of living that allows us to be more happy and more fulfilled. And from that happiness and fulfillment and natural peace that we all have access to, we all have access to this natural deep peace and happiness, which comes as you practice meditation. You see that and you're able to find that far more. When somebody is accessing that, all of these good things come from that. Productivity, efficiency, harmony within teams, all of that comes, but it's as a result. It's a result of a change in mindset. So I just encourage people who are working within teams to actually look at your team. Are they really happy? Are they actually happy in themselves? If they're not, what can you do to address that? Because I think deep down, I think this crisis has shown us that the way we were all living before, it was working for various things, but I don't think that most people are truly happy and at peace with themselves. And really, if you can find that as a leader of a team, you'll be a totally different leader from the leader that you were before if you were not happy and peaceful before, And so just trying to access that, that's organic, It's got to be genuine. I really appreciate you including the word organically there. It's really important. I hope that helps.
Superb. So, Dom, I think we've covered everything. Thank you so much for your insights. Thank you so much for this great session. And I think it's been really helpful in kind of taking a step back and reflecting as we go through this difficult time. And I hope everyone that joined us found it useful as well. If we did not answer your question for any reason, or if there was a question that you weren't able to ask, as I mentioned, we will be sharing Dominic's details. You can get in touch with any one of us, and we'll be more than happy to address your queries in the future. And stay tuned. Thank you, Dom.
Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Thank you.